say no forever. He saw me and bought me with his redeeming blood. He loved me, I knew him, and all my love is to you. He crowns me to victory beneath the cleansing.
Well, we are going to do a 2-week short series here called The Great Restoration, and I'm excited about what I'm going to share with you this morning. I want to start with a question, okay? So I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to be thinking about this question during our time together today. And the question is simple. How's your relationship with Jesus? Now, let me just preface it, I guess, or wind back a little bit. Not what do other people think your relationship is like. Not, okay, well, Brent, I do this, and this at the church, or this and that at home. You know what your relationship with Jesus is like. You know the intentions behind why you do the things that you do. So you could do all the things at church that you want to do, or even read your Bible and still have some intentions that are not correct. If reading your Bible and praying is just this checklist so you can feel good about yourself instead of trying to connect with your holy God and find out what His will is, then yeah, the intention there behind it may not be correct. So how's your relationship with Jesus? And what I've found in my, 21 years of being a follower of Jesus is that it's a bit of a roller coaster at times. At least it has been for me. I don't know if it has been for you. But I've had some highs and I've had some real lows. Some exciting times, some scary times. I think of, my failures, that led to different consequences. It is, I can think of times where it was a struggle even to want to pray or open my Bible. It was something that was far from me. And you find yourself at times in those stale periods in your relationship with Jesus. It's not a good time to be in. And so what I want us to do today, when we talk about restoration, you're restoring something. So if your relationship with Jesus is like that, I want to introduce you to a guy who his relationship with Jesus was like that. And how Christ basically picked him up, cleaned him up, and said, okay, it's time to start walking the way you know you're supposed to walk. And the guy's name is Peter. I mentioned on my Facebook post this morning, I'm thankful for guys like Peter and Thomas in the Bible because you get to see these guys fail, right? I mean, these men saw Jesus do things that none of us have seen with our own eyes. They experienced things that very few people had ever experienced. And yet, Thomas, you find, even doubting Christ resurrecting from the grave. Peter, you find him failing miserably on more than one occasion. So you get to see the side of these men that most of us, really, we never let other people know about. We don't like to talk about our failures or the difficulties in our relationships with Jesus, so we kind of tuck those away. But I'm thankful that the Scriptures, see, one thing you need to know about the Bible is it's incredibly 100% honest, sometimes brutally honest, where the truth, it just smacks you in the face. And so these guys, their story mentioned in Scripture, they have nothing to hide, and I'm thankful for that because if for me, if being a Christian meant I had to be this perfect person 100% of the time, I know I can't attain that. I'm trying to be like Jesus. That's not the guy. I'm not telling you not to try. But man, I'm thankful we have guys like Thomas and Peter who fail, and then we get to see how they come back from that. It's not they fail and they give up, all right? Quitting, we're not going to do that. It's they fail, and we get to see how Jesus does something with their lives. That's what I'm thankful for. Let's consider this guy, Peter, for a second. Peter was closer to Jesus than most people, right? He spent 3 years under the teaching of Jesus. You spend 3 years with anyone, you obviously get to know them, get to know all about them. Not only was he with Jesus for 3 years, he was on the inner three. If you're not familiar with what that is, Jesus had 12 disciples. Peter, James, and John, though, got to experience things that the others did not. And so he got to see things, experience things other people didn't. He understood Christ in ways that other people didn't. He even went as far to say and proclaim that Jesus was the Christ. Peter, at times, you see him almost not intimidated by Jesus, though. One time he went so far as when Jesus was talking about his death and resurrection, Peter basically says, no, you're not going to die. Basically, I'm not going to let that happen. And of course, Jesus rebukes him. He says, get behind me, Satan. I mean, just basically lays out to him, you don't know what you're talking about. Peter, at times, was a prideful man. One time he said, though all the disciples leave you and run, I'm not going anywhere. I'll die for you. That's pretty prideful, isn't it? To say, I'm more spiritual than all those guys. I'm not going to leave. But what does he do? When the heat gets turned up in the kitchen, he bails. He even goes so far as to say, I don't even know who this Jesus guy is. Can you imagine? You've spent 3 years, and then you act like you never met the guy. Peter experienced highs of walking on water. You say, well, he sunk. Yeah, but the other disciples are on the boat, and he walked on water. You ever walked on water? Me neither. I've tried. We would go to North Lake in the summer for vacations. It's in Tennessee. And I'd sit on the edge of the deck, and I'd put my foot on the skin of the water. You can feel it, if you just put your foot there. And I just thought it would be kind of cool as a kid to walk to the bank, which is about 100 yards away. It never worked, but I just thought about that. Well, Peter did it, I'll give it a shot. You have Peter, when they go to arrest Jesus, trying to stick up for Jesus. I mean, you do get the sense he loves Christ. He grabbed a sword, and he's trying to kill this guy, but Peter's such a great swordsman, he misses the dude's head and cuts his ear off, right? How do you miss the guy's head? He was no soldier, he was a fisherman. You have some highs, you have some lows. So as we come upon John chapter 21, I think what Peter's experiencing is what a lot of us experience. Jesus has already resurrected. Peter, in fact, has already been to the tomb. I mean, him and John get there. Mary says, hey, it's empty. They go in, and sure enough, it's empty. Christ has already revealed himself twice to Peter. But what you don't find in this period of time, you don't find Peter then proclaiming that Jesus is alive to everybody. You don't find him going here and there and saying, it's real, he's alive. Why is that? Because you see it in the book of Acts. Why at this period of time? You know why I think Peter is overcome with guilt. Guilt that he even doubted that Jesus was going to resurrect. Now, was Peter a believer? Absolutely. You get that indication when the rooster crowed 3 times. Jesus told Peter, hey, you're going to deny me. Peter said, no, I'm not. Peter denies Christ, and that rooster crows, and he goes out and he weeps bitterly. And I don't think his weeping has really stopped. I think in his mind he thought, I am such a failure. Jesus was right. He's alive. And I didn't believe him. And I went so far as to deny him. So why don't you see him going and proclaiming it to everyone? It's because he's overcome with guilt. How could I do this? Why on earth would he want to use me now? Jesus at this point has told the disciples, hey, I want you to go to Galilee and I want you to meet me on the mountain. Okay, I want you to keep that in mind. They're supposed to be meeting Jesus on a mountain. And what we're going to see here in John chapter 21, again, our theme is the Great Restoration, is we're going to see how Jesus really brings Peter around. He knows what Peter is feeling, And we get to see how Jesus essentially picks him up. And the results are the Peter you see in the book of Acts, one who preaches and 3,000 people start following Jesus. That's what we see. So let's see how this reconstruction of this relationship takes place, because his relationship with Jesus at this point stinks. Yeah, Jesus has resurrected, but Pete's relationship's not good. It's difficult for him. So John chapter 21, verse 1. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias. Now, the Sea of Tiberias is also known as the Sea of Galilee. It wasn't really a sea, it was more of a lake. So just to kind of give you an idea. And on the wise showed he himself. So basically what John is saying here in verse 1 is that I'm about to tell you what Jesus did when he showed up at the Sea of Galilee. Now again, these guys are supposed to be on a mountain waiting for Jesus. Now my train of thought, and I could be wrong on this, is that maybe they went to that mountain and they're waiting on Jesus, and either they get impatient or they're just ready to throw the towel in. I don't know. Maybe they get to that mountain and Jesus is making them wait, and they're like, you know what, just enough with this. Guys, Pete gets up and he says, guys, we got to figure out how we're going to feed ourselves, what we're going to do for money. I mean, we've got to think about these things. Let's go. And that leads us to verse 2. They were together, Simon Peter and Thomas, called Didymus, and Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other of his disciples. I believe these other disciples could possibly be Andrew and Philip, because they are from that area. They knew the area. Like I said, I could be wrong about that, but what you have is Peter and these other disciples. Thomas is there. Thomas, he's already missed a couple things, and so he's decided, I'm not going to miss anything else. I'm going to go exactly where Jesus wants me to go, and I'm going to do what he wants me to do, or so he thought. We get to verse 3, and Simon Peter said to them, I go a-fishing. I just picture these guys on that mountain waiting for Jesus, Peter getting impatient, already feeling this massive amount of guilt because he has failed Jesus so miserably, and he thinks, 1, he can't use me anymore. 2, I'm done with this. I'm going to go back to what I know. Guys, I'm going fishing. Do you want to go with me? And they all say, sure. I mean, one thing you can't deny about Peter is that he was a leader. He says, we're going to do this, and they're like, okay, we'll follow you. We also go with thee. They went forth and entered into a ship immediately, and that night they caught nothing. So we already have a couple issues here in this broken relationship. Not a severed relationship. It's just that his relationship with Jesus is not very good. He says, I'm going fishing. I'm going back to what I know. If you don't know who Peter was, that was his profession before following Christ. He fished. It was a family business, no doubt. We know it was for James and John. And so he says, I'm going to go fishing. Do you see any moment there in verse 3 where Peter prayed about that? Where he prayed about his decision? Don't make the mistake, friends, of making decisions without praying about those decisions. Peter is not concerned about he's making a career change at this point. This is a big decision. I'm just going to go fishing. I'm done with this. He doesn't talk to the Lord about it. And when you feel like a failure and you feel as if you have just messed up this relationship with Jesus so much, it's quite often he's the last person you want to talk to. But the reality is he's the first person you should turn to. So he makes a grave mistake, and he starts making decisions not based on the will of God, but based upon his own will, his self-will. I'm not concerned with what God wants in this. I'm just going to go fishing. The priorities in his life start shifting from serving God and loving others to I'm going to serve Peter, and I'm going to keep his best interest in mind. It's as if maybe he thinks Jesus isn't going to provide for him. Now, some have said, or maybe you're thinking this, Brent, what if Peter just wanted to kill some time. Like, we're waiting on this mountain, guys. Let's go catch some fish, get some dinner. There's a couple reasons why I believe that Peter wasn't just saying, hey, guys, let's just grab our nets and head down and fish for a little bit until Jesus gets here. There's a couple of verses I want to point out to you of why I believe Peter was making a career decision. He was saying, I am getting out of here. The first one we see is in John chapter 16, when Jesus is saying, behold, the hour comes, yea, is now come, that ye shall be scattered, every man to his own. And the implication there is that you're going back to your own things and your old way of life. You shall leave me alone, yet I am not alone because the Father is with me. And sure enough, they depart and go to their own. Another reason I believe that Jesus is, or Peter is making this decision not to just fish for a few hours, but to just leave and go back to his old profession is later on in John 21, verse 15, Jesus says, so when they had dined, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonas, lovest thou me more than these? Now he repeats this question, and we'll talk more about that next week. The these he's talking about is not the other disciples. One, because you never find Jesus going around comparing other people's love for him. Because that would breed some self-pride, wouldn't it? If you were saying, if Jesus was reaffirming Peter, hey, you love me more than all these guys, that is all that's going to do is bring a spark of pride within Peter. You never find Jesus comparing people's love or doing those types of things. When Jesus is saying, do you love me more than these, I think what's taking place there is at this point in this passage, and we're fast forwarding a little bit to next week, but they're already on the shore, the nets are already there, the fish are already there, and I think Jesus pulls them aside. And they're walking, and maybe Jesus even points to the nets or even points to his boat, and he says, do you love me more than these things? Am I worth more to you than this right here? So I don't think Peter was intending to just go fish for a couple hours. I think he was abandoning his post because he felt he was no longer worthy of it or good at it or that he could even do anything. In his mind, he is a complete and total failure. Then we get to verse 4. But when morning was now come, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples knew not that it was Jesus. Then Jesus said unto them, children, have ye any meat? They answered him, no. A couple things I want you to notice. Physically, there's a distance between them and Christ. If they were where they're supposed to be, on the mountain, most likely Jesus would have already shown up. Right? Because they're not where they're supposed to be, there's distance between them and Jesus. Physically, but more importantly, relationally, there's distance between them and Jesus. Now, these guys have been fishing all night. The reason these men fished at night is because the fish in the Sea of Galilee would come to the shallows at night because the water, of course, would be cooler. During the day, they would go down into the deep because the water towards the surface would be warmer. So these men fished in the shallow areas at night where you could actually catch the fish. And so Jesus is coming by in the morning. These men are not where they're supposed to be. And notice what Jesus calls them. Let me ask you this. First of all, does Jesus know who these guys are? Does he know who's out there fishing? Of course he does. And he says, children. Now, Jesus isn't using this term in an endearing way where he says, my dearest children, my dear children. He's almost saying like, hey, fellas, as if he's standing on that shore, he sees that boat, and he says, hey, guys. Now, he doesn't use a term of endearment. He used really a term of distance in their relation. He doesn't say, my friends, my dear children. He says, hey, guys, have you caught anything? Of course, they haven't caught anything. Which leaves me thinking about something. Jesus knows these guys haven't caught anything. He asked an obvious question. Do you have any fish? Is it possible that at moments in our life, Jesus allows us to be in a position where our needs, they seem as if they're not met because we're trying to meet them on our own without relying on him? Is it possible for us to feel as if, okay, I've got to take care of this because God won't? Have you got any food? Have you got any meat? Do you have your needs met? And of course they do not. It's almost as if Jesus is saying, see, I told you, without me you can do nothing. John chapter 15, he lays it out. Without me, you can do nothing. You can't meet your needs, nothing. Think about it, guys. I took care of you for 3 years. These guys haven't had a job in 3 years. They haven't had a place to live in 3 years. And did they starve to death? No. Did they have clothes? Yeah. So for 3 years, Jesus takes care of them. And then all of a sudden, he's not going to do it anymore. Now maybe you're thinking, well, Brent, my needs are met, man. We live in America. We have plenty of food. I have plenty of money in my bank account. Everything is good. Do you actually believe that is how God defines success? Because I believe it is not how God defines success. Because yes, you can have, obviously we have no problem having food. I don't remember the last time I went without a meal. We all have clean water. Yes, we have those. Our needs are met. But Revelation chapter 3, verse 17 says, because thou sayest, I am rich and increase with goods and have need of nothing, and knowest not that thou art wretched, miserable, poor, blind, and naked. If you're thinking, well, my bank account's good, and I hope all your bank accounts are good, I really do. But if you think that is where your security is in, if you think that having the material things is where your security is in, my friends, that is not how God defines success. You could have all those things and be poor. That's what's crazy. So these guys are now facing a distance, not just physically from Jesus, but relationally with Jesus. Jesus makes sure these guys understand how empty they are without him. Have you caught anything? No. And they're not going to catch anything. If you think, Christian, you're going to go through this life that, okay, Brent, I'm saved, I'm good, I don't need to do anything else, I'm set. If you think that is the extent of your relationship with Jesus, I'm sorry, you have completely missed the point. That's almost like saying, well, I married my wife, and I don't need to improve on that relationship. Let's be honest with ourselves. If you're the same person you were when you got married, how would that turn out for your relationship? Not good. Right? Marriage is hard work. It takes a lot of work. So why do we sometimes find ourselves that, okay, I've got Jesus, yeah, I'm a Christian, Brent, but then we do nothing with that reality? There will be distance in your relationship with Jesus. We get to verse 6. And this is where we find some interesting things taking place. And he, Jesus, said unto them, cast the net on the right side of the ship, and ye shall find. They cast therefore, and now they were not able to draw it for the multitude of the fishes. These guys had fished all night. Do you think they just fished on the left side the whole night? Like, we're just going to do this side, and they don't know who this is, and this person on the shore is like, maybe try the right side. You ever had someone, when you're working on something, they point something out obvious to you that you've already tried? Like, seriously? You're asking me if I've done that already? Just leave me alone. Jesus is just like, hey, get your net and put on the right side. Peter is probably at this point cussing under his breath, like, yeah, I'll show you the right side. He's just ticked off. But they're just kind of like, all right, let's throw the net on the right side. Last cast of the day. And what happens? A bunch of fish show up. How do a bunch of fish show up? I'll tell you how. Jesus goes, hey, fish, get in the net. That's exactly what he does, right? I mean, because fish listen to God better than we do sometimes, right? He says, fish that are over here, there's a net, and that is where you're going. And they're like, okay, Jesus. And they get in the net. At least that's in my mind how I think. It's interesting how Jesus goes about this. I want you to do something for me real quick. And if you're visiting with us, yes, it's usually this weird. I need everybody to raise your hands. Come on, raise your hands. I'm going to ask you a question. Why on earth did you do that? I told you to, right? There's two things that were active right there, just for a second. My will and your will, right? You didn't have to put your hands up, but you responded. Jesus says, hey guys, cast the net on the right side. Did they have to do it? No, but they did. What we see is God expects you to do something in your life for him. Like he expects you to serve him. He expects you to respond. He has his will for you. But you know what? Your will has to be in line with his will. Because you can say, no, I don't want to do that. You've got to listen to him. So when he says, hey, put your hands up, then if God says put your hands up, you have that decision. Am I going to do this or am I not going to do this? So what you know to be God's will, which is quite plain in the Word of God, let's just be simple about it. If we use the Great Commission, we're supposed to make disciples, baptize them, and teach them. Let's just start there and work around. There's other things we could talk about, but that's pretty general. You're supposed to grow in your faith and share it with others. I mean, that's God's will, and you've got to make the decision if you're going to listen to him. You want to know the marks of a mature Christian? I want to give it to you real quick. Because I used to think that a mature Christian was like a place and time, you know? Like, okay, I've studied the Bible through and through, gone to all these classes, I've served in all these areas, I've done this, and this, and so the result should be that I'm a mature Christian. But that wasn't the reality, because I can remember finding myself having done so many things and being spiritually bankrupt, I felt. Like I've been busy for God. So what does a mature Christian look like then? I think it's really quite simple. A mature Christian is going to do something very simple, and it's going to be evident in their life, and it's going to be consistent in their life. You're going to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and you're going to love others as yourself, meaning you're going to love the church, you're going to love the people that you are believers with, and then you're going to love those who are not followers of Jesus. I think, because like I said, you can have all the classes that you want, but if you are not acting in love for your God and love for other people, then I would say you're probably not a mature Christian, regardless of how long you've been in church or how much you know about the Bible. I would say you're not mature. You're probably still a baby. Your relationship isn't what it's supposed to be. God expects us to do some things. These men were wise and they listened to Jesus, and all these fish showed up. Verse 7, therefore that disciple whom Jesus loved, if you're not familiar with who that is, that's John. He's the guy who's writing this gospel. He never uses his own name. He just often says, yeah, I'm the guy who Jesus loved. Maybe that was a prideful statement. I don't think so. Maybe how he was saying it was just a term of endearment between him and Jesus. But he says, therefore the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it's the Lord. So the guy on the shore is like, hey, throw your net over here. They're like, okay. They throw the net, all these fish show up, and John's like, oh my goodness, it's Jesus. And then we see what Peter does. Now when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he girded his fisher's coat unto him, for he was naked, and did cast himself into the sea. And the other disciples came in a little ship, for they were not far from the land, as it were about 200 cubits, about a football field away, dragging the net with the fishes. As soon as they were come to the land, they saw a fire of coals there, and fish laid thereon, and bread. John's like, okay, it's Jesus. Pete, he's like, I got to get my coat on, and he just jumps in the water. Like, okay. He's ready to go. He's desperate to get close to Jesus. I mean, you got to kind of admire Peter for that, right? He knew he was far from Jesus. But when he realized it, he didn't want to stay there. They get to shore, and Jesus has cooked breakfast. Right? It's morning time. He's got fish and bread. They're like, well, how did Jesus get the fish and the bread? This is how Jesus cooks breakfast. Fish, bread, fire, done. Right? I mean, that's how he could do it. He didn't have an oven, so he just like bread, boom, fish, you're cooked. It'd be awesome to cook that way, because I'd be like pizza, chocolate cake, ice cream, repeat. Right? But Jesus is using an illustration here. These men have thought, okay, I'm going to do it my own way. I'm going to provide for myself. I'm going to meet my own needs. And Jesus shows up and lets them know, fellas, I can take care of you. In fact, sit down. I've got you breakfast. Let's talk. What's that old song? Be not dismayed, whate'er betide, God will take care of you. If I knew the melody or harmony or whatever that is, I'd sing it. Do you know it? Okay. Neither of them know it, so we need to learn that song then. But he's like, guys, I can take care of you. And I'm here. Here I am. You've left to go do your own thing. Verse 10, Jesus said to them, bring the fish which ye have now caught. Simon Peter went up and drew the net to the land, full of great fishes, 153 great fish, not little fish. When Jesus tells fish to get in the net, he gets big fish and they go in the net. 153 of them. For there are also many, yet was not the net broken. And Jesus said unto them, come and dine. And none of the disciples durst ask him, who art thou, knowing that it was the Lord. Nobody wanted to be that guy who were like, so you are Jesus, right? No one wanted to be that I guess you could say, moron who didn't realize that only Jesus does this. They were just kind of like, yeah, it's definitely got to be Jesus. Verse 13, Jesus then comes, takes bread, gives them, and fish likewise. This is now the third time that Jesus showed himself to his disciples after that he was risen from the dead. Now we'll discuss more what takes place in the coming verses. But what we have here is a reassurance. And if you have failed, or you feel far from God in your relationship, Jesus seeks them out, first of all. Right? I mean, he goes to where they are at. When he says, I'm not going to leave you, I'm not going to forsake you, you have to actually believe that he meant that. And I understand he may be the last person you want to talk to because of what you've done or the state you find yourself in, but he is the first person which you should turn to because he will meet all of your needs. And I'm not just talking material things. Our needs are much greater than that, to be restored in our relationship with the one who created us. So maybe you're struggling with your own will this morning. Maybe you're telling the Lord you're too busy for things when the reality is your priorities are just wrong. Maybe you're making decisions without praying about them and it's affecting your life now. Maybe you find some good things that are actually dominating your life. Because think about it, fishing is not a bad thing, right? But does Jesus want Peter fishing? Not for fish. He had something else in mind for him. And it is so easy for good things to eventually choke out the great things that God has for us. So maybe the priorities in your relationship with Jesus are not where they should be. Maybe you don't serve. Maybe you're not growing. I can't pinpoint it for you, but you sure can. And if I can give you any point of advice is to go back and to listen to what Jesus says. You know, this is a familiar passage because Jesus has done this before. See, in Luke chapter 5, before the disciples ever were following Jesus on a consistent basis, Jesus was teaching. And he borrowed a boat. He's kind of out from the shore a little bit. And he looks over at Peter. Now, Peter is, at this point, just one of the learners under Jesus. I mean, he hasn't left his nets yet. I mean, he's still doing the family business. And Jesus is teaching to this multitude. And he tells Peter, hey, put your nets down. Now, they had been cleaning their nets. They were done fishing. It was daytime. The fish are already supposed to be in the deep, uncatchable at this point. And they put their nets down, and the same thing happened. There were so many fish that they couldn't pull it into the boat. And that's when Jesus told Peter, you will no longer fish for fish. You're going to fish for men. So it's almost as if Jesus was reminding these guys of what he called them to do. So it's almost as if, friends, God is reminding you why he left you here. He didn't intend for you to just get saved, get forgiven, and then to just go through your life making sure it was as comfortable and as easy as possible. Can we be comfortable at times? Sure we can. But it is not the object of our life. It is to serve Jesus with everything we have, our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and that might involve difficulty. So it's almost as if you're distant in your relationship, Jesus is saying, you need to remember what I left you here for. It's not to serve yourself. It is to serve me. It's to serve your Lord, your God. You're to be fishers of men, not keepers of an aquarium. To do something with the time that he has given you. If you're distant in your relationship, your first act is to jump out of the boat and swim right to Jesus. Peter knew he was distant, and he's like, I can't stay there. I won't stay there. I'm going to get to Christ. So if that's you, you need to make some decisions today, friend. And you need to get back to what you know God has you to do. Would you bow with me today?
I'm a Savior King from glory. How he gave his life on Calvary to save us like me. I heard about his glory, how his precious blood's atonement. And now repented of my sin and won the victory. A victory in Jesus, my Savior forever. He saw me and bought me with his redeeming blood. He loved me when I knew him, and all my love is to him. He brings me to victory beneath the cleansing. I heard about his healing, of his cleansing power revealing. How he made the lame to walk again, and caused the blind to see. Then I cried to Jesus, come heal my broken spirit. And somehow Jesus came and brought to me the victory. A victory in Jesus, my Savior forever. He sought me and bought me with his redeeming blood. He loved me and I knew him, and all my love's to him. He plunges me to victory beneath the cleansing flood. I heard about a mansion he's built for me in glory. I heard about the streets of gold beyond the crystal sea. About the angels singing that old redemption story. And some sweet day sing up there a song of victory. A victory in Jesus, my Savior forever. He saw me and bought me with his redeeming blood. He loved me and I knew him, and all my love's to him. He plunged me to victory beneath the cleansing flood. Oh, victory in Jesus, my Savior forever. He saw me and bought me with his redeeming blood. He loved me and I knew him, and all my love is to him. He plunged me to victory beneath the cleansing flood. You guys can have a seat.